Grand Central Station, the southern terminus for most Metro-North services, and one of the busiest and most well-known train stations in the world, for good reason. But we aren't going to focus on Grand Central today. Maybe another time. I want to focus on one of the 3 Metro-North lines that originate here, the Hudson Line. As a native New Yorker, I shockingly have never been on this line before until now, despite it being my favorite Metro-North line by far. So this is a fun short trip to go on. The Metro-North Hudson Line, like the Harlem and New Haven lines, originates out of Grand Central Station. All 3 of these lines run along the Park Avenue main line through Harlem and into the Bronx, New York's northernmost borough. Fun fact, the New York Subway's R32 subway cars had their inaugural run on the Park Avenue main line heading to Grand Central. The Hudson Line separates from the Harlem and New Haven lines near 149th Street and continues on its own path upstate. The current line started as the Troy and Greenbush Railroad, which opened in 1845 and ran from Troy, New York to Greenbush, or modern-day Rensselaer, New York. That city's name was not as hard to pronounce as I thought. Then came the Hudson River Railroad, which extended the Troy and Greenbush to Albany and all the way down to New York City. It began operation in 1851. An American businessman, Cornelius Vanderbilt, or the Commodore, bought the Hudson River Railroad along with the New York and Harlem Railroad, which is the modern-day Harlem Line, in 1864. These railroads, plus a few smaller ones like the Spine Dival and Port Morris Railroad, would be merged into the already existing New York Central Railroad. The New York Central was one of, if not the biggest and most well-known railroad in the northeastern U.S., not counting the Pennsylvania Railroad, of course. The portion of the New York Central that was once the Spine Dival and Port Morris Railroad had been extended through the Bronx along the Harlem River. The current Harlem Line became the Harlem Division of the New York Central, and the current Hudson Line became the Hudson Division. All of this growth for the New York Central, along with the construction and opening of Grand Central Terminal, had made the New York Central very successful. Passenger trains, such as the famous 20th Century Limited, for example, sped up and down the water level route. This famed line included part of the modern-day Hudson Line and ran in between Grand Central in New York City and LaSalle Street in Chicago. The streamlined steam engines that ran this route, nicknamed Hudsons for obvious reasons, became synonymous with the New York Central's identity and was included in many posters and advertisements for the railroad and the 20th Century Limited service. I recommend watching Amtrak Guide 365's Engines of New York Central videos to learn more about the specific engines New York Central had in their roster. They're a great watch. This success wouldn't last forever for the New York Central, however. After the Second World War, the New York Central, along with other railroads in the United States, weren't doing well. An increase in the use of road vehicles like cars and trucks, and later down the line airlines, contributed heavily to this decline. Railroads were desperate. Mergers, cutting back lines, closing lines, canceling services, unkempt trains and stations. Things were not going well for railroads in the States, at all. Eventually, the New York Central caved and merged with the Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York Central's main rival. Together, they became Penn Central in 1968. Despite this merger would not last long. By 1970, Penn Central declared bankruptcy. A year later, Amtrak, or the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, started taking over many of the United States passenger trains. They took over the Penn Central's Northeast Corridor, but the bankrupt company still had to operate commuter trains on that route, along with the modern-day Hudson Line. Commuter train operations on the Hudson and in Connecticut and Massachusetts were handed over to a new company called Conrail in 1976. Eventually, though, Conrail started giving control of these commuter routes to the states they ran in. The MBTA, took over service in and around Massachusetts, while Metro-North Railroad would take over the services in New York State and part of Connecticut. Conrail would eventually be absorbed into CSX and Norfolk Southern, two freight railroads that still exist to this day. And here we are today. The Hudson Line still sees plenty of commuter and intercity services. Metro-North takes care of local and express commuter services up the line to Croton, Harmon, and Poughkeepsie, while a couple of Amtrak services run express intercity trains deeper into upstate New York, some services going as far as Toronto, Canada. This is just my opinion, but the Hudson Line as a whole might be one of the most beautiful and scenic train lines in the New York area. I'm so used to seeing loud, screechy, dirty subway trains that either run perfectly or run like absolute shit. And traveling on this line for the first time was a really nice experience. The local stops are quiet, peaceful, and damn near beautiful. They have such an amazing view of New Jersey and the Hudson River. If anyone watching is planning on visiting New York, or already lives there and doesn't really know or care about this line, pay it a visit at least once. I'm positive you won't regret it. Thank you for watching.